just for the people on Zoom. Thank you very much for coming along. It's wonderful to see you all. I want to begin just by acknowledging that I'm standing and working on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Thank you also to the people who are joining us on Zoom. Hello. And please, if you're on Zoom, please add in the chat and let us know if you're having difficulty hearing anything or seeing anything. I'm really pleased to be introducing this session on place and identity making. And we've got Eleonora Cerqua, we've got Cindy Evans and Rosemary Joyner with us today. So thank you so much for coming along, all of you. And I'll just quickly introduce Eleonora. So she's an archaeologist, specialist in archaeological and historical research, and a teacher of Italian language and culture. She has a bachelor's degree in history and conservation of artistic heritage and a master's degree in archaeological science and historical and archaeological research methods. Both of them are issued by the Università degli, oh, my pronunciation is going to be terrible, just watch me go. Università degli Studi, Roma Tre, Italy. Since March 2021, she's been a PhD candidate in FASS here at UTS with a research project focusing on Italian social centers. Since February 2022, she's been delivering Italian language and culture tutorials also at UTS. Give a warm welcome to Eleonora.
Let me talk in this, yeah. So as well, I would like to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people of our nation, the traditional custodians of this land. And I pay my respect to the elders, past, present, future. And I extend the respect to all the Aboriginal and Strait Islander people of the land, as well as the plants, the water, and the animals of this land. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Before introducing my presentation, I would like to thank the Hunar Symposia team for having me here today and presenting at these conferences, which focuses on how art can communicate about conflicts around the world. So here, the speakers and myself, we're going to talk about the brutality of humankind through one of the highest achievements of humanity, which is art. In particular, I've selected a form of art which was born to be a means of communication, and it's something that we come across every single day, even here in this building, which is posters. And posters are specifically realized to draw our attention, to catch our eye. And in this way, they communicate their message. Working. Change slide. Sorry, it's just frozen.
What is that, left, right arrows? I don't know.
They stop sharing, sorry.
Yeah, no, we just need to reshare.
If you want to keep on chatting, I can set it up.
Sure. Absolutely, thank you. So today I will present some, I will present some posters that were realized to raise awareness about a conflict which is happening 14,000 kilometers away from here in the north of Syria, in a region called Rojava. These posters have been hung in the city of Rome, Italy, by a social center called Forte Prenestina, which is also the case study of my PhD. And Forte Prenestina and Rojava, they share similar values and ideals, for instance, anti-racism and anti-sexism. And the social center Forte Prenestina has been supporting Rojava since the early stage of the conflict. However, before presenting the poster itself, I'm going to explain why posters can be considered a form of art. And also I'm going to give a little bit of background about the Italian Social Center in order to understand the context within which these posters were realized. So
I'll keep on trying. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Miss Mike, I don't know. I'm very sorry that it's not working. It will at some point. Meanwhile, I'm going to tell you that according to the professor in art of design at the State University of New York, Elizabeth Guthrie, posters are considered one of the most long-lasting visual communication form. And, I quote, the poster exerts a palpable physical presence, shaping spaces while reflecting and altering human behavior. Since they were born, posters were conveying different messages. For instance, they are used to advertise products and services, to recruit soldiers, to promote political parties. The origins of the posters date back to the 19th century, and they were born in Paris, but soon they spread also in London and New York. In the 20th century, we can find the propaganda posters, which were created in the United States during World War I. And after World War II, the posters started to promote also cultural and little bit. Yeah. Beautiful. To promote also movies and cultural events. In 1960s, posters were used to promote the ferment of cultural and political ferment at that time. Today, I'm going to illustrate some posters that communicate and inform about wars around the world. With their high-catching graphics and these short but very effective messages, they can raise awareness about conflicts. And usually they also take a very strong position about the conflict they are presenting. I've selected some posters realized by the Social Center Forte Prenestina in order to support the fundraising event they organized in the Social Center, especially for the women of Rojava. But first of all, let me clarify what are social centers. Social centers are venues for social aggregation, countercultural and political activities, and they represent one example of the grassroots initiative of urban social movement. Their common features are self-managing, self-financing, and the occupation of abandoned buildings. Social centers propose a different approach to social life based on equality. They also affirm the right to take part in the decision-making processes that shape the space of a city. And social centers emerged in Italy in the 1970s, and they reached their peak in the 1990s. In social centers, they organize events such as cinemas, theater, exhibition, but also they focus on solidarity actions. What we're going to talk today about is Forte Prenestino's action in support of Rojava, and especially the women of Rojava. The arrow still not working. The PowerPoint is not helping us, sorry. Nothing.
Maybe we just use the arrows. But we'll,
yeah.
If you keep on going, we'll set it.
Sure. Sorry. Forte Prenestino is a self-managed social center in Rome, created in 1986 in the southeast of Rome area called Centocelle. It is the biggest social center in Europe and one of the oldest in Italy. And people going to Forte Prenestino share a set of values, which is anti-fascism, anti-racism, and anti-sexism. And on the basis of these values, Forte Prenestino decided to support Rojava and the women in Rojava. They organize events, which are, of course, advertised on the website, but in order to reach a broader community, they used to hang posters all around Rome. Because, as you can imagine, the website is visited basically by the community itself. While with the posters around the city, they can reach a broader audience, and they can raise awareness about the Rojava topic. Now, let me introduce a little bit what is Rojava. Rojava is also known as the Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria. It's a region composed of 7 self-governed cantons. In this area, we found mostly Kurds, but also Assyrian, Turkmens, Arabs, and Chechen. And in 2018, there were 2 million people living there. So as you can imagine, it's quite a big area, quite populated as well. Rojava's creation is rooted in the uprising of the Syria conflict. Kurds and the aforementioned minorities were opposed to the regime of Assad, and especially is trying to Arabization their culture. 3 cantons declared their independence and their autonomy in January 2014, and with the adoption of a charter, which is called the Social Charter. It's not very lucky. Yeah. In the charter, the people living in this self-administrated area, they declare that they are achieving justice, freedom, and democracy. It's up. There is a folder, a yellow folder, but I think it's happening. Yes. Yeah. And their democracy is without discrimination on the basis of race, religion, gender, doctrine, or creed. They respect the principle of self-determination of people and ensure the women and the children's rights. Sorry? Oh, the chart of Rojava. The political power is held by the Democratic Union Party. The two main pillars of Rojava are the model of direct democracy, which means that basically citizens can take part into the decision-making processes at the base of the management of the city, as well as the denial of a nation-state structure in favor of an administration structure, and which incorporates the different religion and the different ethnic groups. Moreover, as stated in the charter, the model is based on gender equality, and this is realized in all the institutions in Rojava. So for any institution, you will find both a male and a female president, even in the military. Thank you. I'll try with the arrows.
Yeah.
With just the arrow. Let's try with the arrows. Imagine the picture. Okay. So Rojava is defended by military groups YPG and YPJ. The latter is composed only of women. And from 2014, they defended Rojava against the jihadist group of ISIS. With the support of the USA, they managed to liberate many cities and then absorb the culture of these people in Rojava. And the Kurdish and non-Kurdish fighters, they merged together in a group called Syrian Democratic Forces. However, the Syrian government did not recognize the Democratic Federation. And moreover, in 2016, Rojava was also attacked by the Turkey. The YPJ and YPG managed to defeat ISIS in the later 2017 with the support of USA. But once they defeated ISIS, US withdrew its support. So basically, the Kurdish find themselves alone fighting against Turkey. And you can imagine that it's a much bigger and better organized and equipped army. Elamam, who is the president of the Syrian Democratic Council, which governs Rojava, has asked in 2019 to recognize Rojava and included, as she say, I quote, in all the dialogues regarding the country's political future, end of quote. Over the years, Rojava has received a lot of humanitarian aid from international organizations, and people from all over the world have been joining YPG and YPJ. Among them, also several Italians taken army to defend Rojava. And the Social Center Forte Prenestina, as I said before, has started to organize many fundraising to support Rojava and the women living there through the organization Kurdish Red Moon. The events have been advertised by Forte Prenestina website and as well by the posters which have been hanging all around Rome. Through these posters, they can reach a very broad community, and activists hope that this will raise a little bit of awareness about Rojava. People will come to the fundraising event or even just independently learn more about Rojava. Now we'd love to show you some posters, finally. See if we manage. No worries.
I think that we have to show the PowerPoint in here, but just not show it to the people.
Yes.
Because I think that the Zoom.
Which one do you want?
Maybe we can share at least, yeah.
Which slide do you want?
Lower. Lower. This one.
Yeah, we can just email it. Yeah, we could guess. Yes, that's a good idea. Suggested we turn the Zoom video to face this screen.
Absolutely.
Fix the whole thing and I was again.
Sure.
Slides keep blocking.
I'm so sorry.
Two. Maybe don't.
We'll get there. So we're about, are we about up to here? Oh, no, we're further, we're further.
The low one, lower, this one.
This one here.
Yeah.
Let's do that. Then the arrows work, and then let's do this.
Okay, so we finally can see the posters I was talking about. So this one is from 2019. Forte Prenestina organized this event called Gems from Rojava, the Green Revolution of Women. The event, as we learned from the posters, included projections of documentaries and debates in Kurd cuisine and music. In the middle of the poster, we can see a woman, and she's holding a plant, and she has a rifle on the back. She's wearing a uniform, and her hair is partially covered by a red scarf. This woman basically symbolized all the Rojava model. So she stressed the equality of gender, she stressed the freedom of women, and also that they defend their country. Moreover, the plant symbolized the ecological sustainability that Rojava supports. Yes. Here we are at the second poster. This was created for the event Beats for Kurdistan, which took place in Forte Prenestina the 1st of February 2020. And the event included different concepts, for instance, the duo Mubin-Jano and the third sound system Kernek-Parari. And during this event, there was music, but there was also pieces of art by the artist, Turkish Kurdish artist Zehra Doğan. Most of these pieces of art were realized by this artist while she was in prison. She was in prison for 3 years because through her art, she wanted to denounce the massacre of Kurds in 2015 in the city of Nusaybin. So she was in prison for 3 years, and in prison, they were not allowed to have tools to create art. So she was using pieces of newspaper, pieces of clothes. She uses her hair to create brushes, and then organic material like food and blood to make these paintings. So during this event, they sold the paintings of this artist. And while she was in prison, international artists were supporting her, including Bansky, who made murals in Manhattan in New York to support Zehra Doğan. And in this poster, we can see the same women from the previous poster. This time she's surrounded by other women from different nationalities, because this wants to stress how girls and women from all over the world are supporting the women in Rojava. Yes, we're not lucky again. I leave this to you. There was another poster, which was for the event in June 2021, called Kurdistan Roses, Rojava, the Women's Revolution. And during this event, there was a Kurdish dinner and lunch, and there was also the screening of a documentary concerning Zara and all the other women in prison. And this time in the poster, we can see women wearing a uniform, carrying the flag of the YPJ. And this time the faces is not characterized as belonging to any nationalities, because what they want to say with these posters is that all the women in the world, they can recognize in these fighters, because claiming the rights is a borderless demand. The posters I'm just talking about refers to recent event in Forte Prenestina, but they started to support the Rojava even at the beginning of the conflicts. For instance, in an event that's called Rebel Chile, that we are not going to see, but I will just describe to you. During this event, there was a group of people called Rojana Calling, an international delegation who came back to Kobane and went to the social center to present the situation of Kobane. In the same event, there was also Zero Calcare, who is the most famous Italian comic book writer, and he wrote a book called Kobane Calling. And basically in 2015, he joined the Turkish-Syrian borders. He reached there in the city of Mesher. And when he went back, he wrote this book about the situation. And the main character of this book is Ayşe Deniz Karajagil, who was a member of the YPJ, and she was killed. The book was reprinted in 2019 to add the story of Lorenzo Orsorsetti. Lorenzo Orsorsetti was an Italian chef born 1986, so same age as mine, who joined the YPG in 2017, but was killed in 2019 in the city, was killed by the ISIS in the borders between Turkey and Syria. And I would like to end the presentation of the last poster with the letters that Lorenzo wrote in case of his death. I quote, "I don't have regrets. I died doing what I thought was the right thing, defending the weakest and being loyal to my ideals of justice, equality, and freedom. So, despite my premature departure, my life is still successful, and I'm almost sure that I went with a smile on my lips. I could not ask better," end of quote. And we are up to the last slide, maybe. But imagine. So in the last slide, there is a very famous Obey poster. Maybe this is easy to imagine because it's the Obey poster, which says, make art, not war. Okay, so I just wanted to say that all over the world, artists are now pushing to give up war and making art as a response to the human needs. And so thank you for joining me. And sorry, we couldn't see that live, but thank you for being with me anyway.
I'm really sorry. We've got about 5 minutes for questions. So does anyone have here and fill the questions? Does anyone have any questions?
Yes.
I was just wondering about the citizenship of the people in their Syrian citizenship. I know that like there were issues about them being like Turkish and stuff like that. But what was the citizenship thing?
So basically, although they live in Rojava, which is in Syria, in 1962, with a census, basically the Syrian government ripped them 120 Kurdish from their passport. So basically they are stateless. And now there are 300,000 stateless Kurdish living in Syria. So basically they're not recognized to belong to any country. Thank you. Thanks.
Any other questions? We've definitely got time for one.
Not a problem. Absolutely. I would be happy to send the posters. Yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah. And whenever you go to Rome, join the events in the social center in support of Rojava.
I do actually have a quick question.
Sure.
We've got a little bit of time. I guess I just had a question about the visual design of the posters, and I guess because it's come up already in the conference, and I think there's a few different people who work on political posters and protest posters from different contexts, and people who make those posters are often cognizant of what is happening in other environments, like in terms of the style and the image and the font and all those things.
Yeah.
I guess I was just wondering, do you see places where that enters in, where people's use of a certain aesthetic, a certain font, a certain type of image is connecting to other forms of protest or activism from other places where there's those influences?
Well, for instance, like using this kind of cartoon style, it's quite typical of the social center I'm talking about, because they use a lot of the cartoons as a way of demonstrating and raise awareness. So not only about Rojava, but and different words that Forte Prenestino is supporting, they use many times the image of the cartoon.
So the cartoon, but there's a long history of cartoon images in particular. And
Yes,
a certain
I think like we're gonna learn more with you after, right? If I'm correct, yeah. So I'm sure like we will learn more in the conference. So because I'm more focused on the Italian cartoons, but I'm pretty sure all over the world we can find this way of denouncing. For instance, it came to my mind the Persepolis movie, which was worldwide famous.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, maybe just another round of applause. And thanks for your patience.
No, I'm so sorry.
The steel jack. Oh, the little bios. You gotta switch up the corner.
I just have this. The ownership. Oh, no, the bios.
I didn't have my head out. There must be, that.
So our next presentation is from Cynthia Evans. I can see that you're there. Thank you very much for joining us. I think I understand that you're joining us at a very difficult time of day where you are in terms of our time zone gap. So Cynthia's very kindly sent through a recording, but of course is here. So what we'll do is watch the recording, listen to the recording, but then also have time for Q&A. So thank you so much for sending that in advance. I really hope we don't have the same technical problems. The stakes are high. Let's do this. So I do that. Share screen. Just going to make sure that this appears. Screen basic. Give me a moment, I'm just getting there. It doesn't seem to find it, but we might have an option. There we are. Let's do it that way.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to be sharing a bit about my dissertation research, which is about the Effekt Gruppe. From 1965 to 1968, 4 Munich-based artists worked together as an art collective known as the Effekt Gruppe to create a new type of artistic experience and exhibition structure that would activate passive spectators. These 4 artists of the Effekt Gruppe included Dieter Hacker, Karl Reinhardt, Helge Sommerrock, and Walter Zeringer. The group wanted to, quote, bring art down from its high pedestal, end quote, and to be comprehensible and enjoyable to any audience. To make art appealing and understandable, the Effekt Gruppe produced playful and kinetic ephemeral artworks, including interactive environments, and participatory objects made of unconventional materials, including ultraviolet spheres, bubbles, and mice. Effekt's kinetic and ephemeral artworks showed them to be playful, humorous, and subversive. But they also had serious political and social goals to create a new type of art experience that liberated spectators from dominant and oppressive systems. These 4 artists produced their artworks at the same time that mass protests were developing in 1960s West Germany, wherein students rebelled against state militaries and bureaucracies as a rejection of oppressive politics and of West German politicians, which included former Nazi officials. The protests strove for a comprehensive democratization of West German society and to emancipate people from capitalist exploitation, oppression, and alienation, using anti-authoritarian means, which coincided with the rise of neo-Marxism, the Frankfurt School, and the rise of the New Left. The Effekt Gruppe artists participated in these protests and used their artworks to support their politically minded ideas. For example, Effekt collaborated to create a new exhibition type that modeled more democratic and participatory systems, which was a goal for the West German student protesters. Effekt did this by emphasizing an engaged audience and de-hierarchized relationship between artist, art object, and viewer. Effekt felt if a spectator of their art could recognize their ability to influence the visual impact and meaning of an artwork, they could correlate this to recognize their impact in more direct, democratic political processes. Other West German artists and art groups like Fluxus and the capitalist realists Gerhard Richter and Sigmar Polke also shared a critical stance towards capitalism and consumerism, like the Effekt Gruppe and the West German student movements more broadly. Many scholars have parsed out the specific political conceptions and attitudes of these groups, but to date, Effekt has received no major study as a critical West German art group in the 1960s, who also responded to this very context. In this presentation, I argue that this historical gap exists because of Effekt's unique position in West German art history and politics as being influenced by the art movement New Tendencies and non-aligned politics, both originating in Zagreb of the former Yugoslavia. Both the New Tendencies art movement and non-aligned politics are understudied areas in Cold War art history because they both sidestepped Eastern and Western dominant power blocks. In this presentation, I elucidate how Effekt art responded to local West German political concerns with their participation in the student movements, but were incorporating transnational ideas by way of third-way thinking from Yugoslavia. In illuminating this connection between West Germany and Yugoslavia, by way of the Effekt Gruppe, I demonstrate how third-way thinking offered these artists alternative strategies to navigate post-war critiques of capitalism with concrete models of self-managed economics that countered both Western capitalism and Eastern communism. This pushes back on dominant narratives of post-war West Germany that focus primarily on Cold War binaries and a fixation on East versus West thinking. Effekt intersected with Yugoslavian third-way thinking through their participation with the New Tendencies movement by exhibiting at several New Tendencies shows and contributing to several colloquiums. New Tendencies was an avant-garde artistic and intellectual trend that rejected dominant artistic styles of Western abstraction and Eastern socialist realism. By rejecting these major artistic movements, New Tendencies hoped to foster experimental artistic production and to formulate an art adequate to the age of advanced mass production. The Effekt artists were introduced to the movement by a German colleague while they were studying at the Academy of Fine Arts in Munich and became interested in developing artworks that incorporated ideals put forth by other New Tendencies artists, including participation, art as research, and democratizing the art experience. Some key works Effekt produced to meet these experimental and politicized ends were their kinetic space Kugelkabinett or sphere cabinet and their kinetic object Mausbild or mouse picture. Effekt exhibited their kinetic space Kugelkabinett or sphere cabinet at the 1965 Third New Tendencies show. Kugelkabinett was a room painted black with oscillating ultraviolet lights filled with glowing spheres hung from the ceiling that spectators could touch and manipulate at will, which created a playful and disorienting visual effect. The Effekt artists asserted that by touching and playing with the spheres, the work's full kinetic potential was fulfilled, and demanded the viewer offer their own readings. Only through the viewer's interpretation and manipulation is the piece completed, countering typical art object-spectator relationships. Kugelkabinett subverted traditional object and viewer relationships by placing greater emphasis on the spectator to physically activate the work of art. Kugelkabinett is also an infinitely repeatable work and not intended to be commodified or sold for profit. Each time the Effekt group exhibited Kugelkabinett, the group used low-cost materials that were destroyed after the exhibition had ended. They created diagrams and photographs to promote new thinking about materials, which pushed against capitalist cycles of art production, reception, and commodity. The works of the Effekt group consciously dispense with the character of the unique and the erratic. Their anonymity, reproducibility, and use of contemporary art materials were an attempt to avoid being co-opted by the art world. Effekt felt that a liberated society required activated agents and a new type of exhibition model that could demonstrate their ideals of anti-capitalism and democratic art spaces. They formally articulated this new type of exhibition in August of 1965 in their manifesto entitled Über einen neuen Ausstellungstyp, or on a new exhibition type. Conventional exhibition practices, to use the group's language, were boring and often did not generate a meaningful relationship between the spectator and the art. They felt disillusioned with modern art, and this disillusionment was largely a result of dominant bourgeois elitist practices in the art world in accessibility, comprehensibility, and dependence on capitalist models of art production and reception. In other words, their new exhibition type necessitated artworks that were understandable to a wide audience and uncommodifiable. Effekt artworks were used to model these more participatory and democratic systems, but they also created works to point to the oppressive nature of dominant capitalist systems. Mausbild from 1966, or Mouse Image, another Effekt artwork, engaged with themes of unpredictability within a gridded system and evoked the futility of social and economic hierarchies within a non-hierarchical compositional format. Inhabited by 15 white mice, this kinetic build, or image, was a constructed black box with 8 floors and 12 holes on each floor. The choice of white mice echoes Effekt's and New Tendencies' shared interest in conflating aesthetic experience and science experiments. The movements in this kinetic image were caused by the random appearances of the mice moving in and out of corridors in the structure. Mausbild was both a kinetic image and a kinetic object. The mice could ascend or descend the levels at will, but their movement was restricted by the same closed system. The mice had no way of escaping. This symbolism is strengthened by the construction's evocation of the phrase, the rat race, or the similar German word, Hamsterrad, colloquialisms that both refer to a futile, endless pursuit for financial success or to get ahead in the work environment. The vanity of the rat race in this kinetic image confronts the viewers with symbolic evocations of current capitalist cycles of production, a cycle that perpetuates man's alienation from material and from one another. Despite the kinetic image's potentially sinister undertones, it also offers viewers an unpredictable yet playful performance by the mice that encourage spectators to connect play to social consciousness. While the viewer could not physically intervene, they were confronted with a system that could echo larger social systems. Mausbild demonstrates how Effekt's artworks could catalyze a viewer to recognize the social systems they inhabit and how they could be agents within them. The West German students involved in the 1960s uprisings were most often seeking to emancipate people from the persistence of fascism within West German governmental people and policies and capitalist exploitation. By creating Mausbild, the Effekt Group was underscoring the vanity of current economic pursuits, and their other participatory works invited spectators to recognize the agency they had to incite changes within these systems. Effekt aims to empower spectators with agency over the valuation of artworks is also exemplified in their production of ephemeral objects that function as tactile art and miniaturized versions of their kinetic environments. In a box created by Effekt, Gruppe Effekt is printed in large text on the top and bottom registers of the lid of the box. The text also includes Kinetisches Kabinett, Kleines Kabinett von der Effekt Gruppe, or Kinetic Cabinet, Small Cabinet by the Effekt Group. The description small cabinet may have referenced the Kugel cabinet, or perhaps other cabinet works made by Effekt. The text relays dates, a phone number, and an address for an art show, concluding with Wir laden Sie herzlich ein. We cordially invite you. A person handling the paper box could slide the box open to reveal a surprise of dark glitter. The glitter would echo the ultraviolet painted spheres in the kinetic room Kugel cabinet, which were both meant to invite play. This small cabinet also embodies participatory ideals of self-management into a tactile and ephemeral object that a spectator could handle, retain as a souvenir, or discard at their pleasure. The box's simultaneous function as an art show advertisement and art object suspends its function between fine art commodity and ephemeral personal memento. The object's dualistic potential empowered the spectator to assign their own material value to the work outside of capitalist institutional delineations. Asserting the spectator's power radicalized the art experience and expressed a belief in a person's agency to resist oppressive systems by revaluing commodities. Art historian Mi-Won Kwon argues that decommodified art practices in the 1960s were a means of usurping the art market system of commodification. Certain artists used, quote, radical alternative models of exchange that counter, complicate, or parody the dominant market and profit-based system of exchange, end quote. These alternative forms of art exchange call into question the traditional art market and art audience relationships. For the Effekt Group, this experimentation on art object valuation coincided with larger critiques of communist and capitalist market systems and efforts to have alternative models to their Western European audience. Effekt's manifesto proposed ideal democratic artworks and proposed a new economic system for exhibitions. This new economic model extricated artists and spectators from institutional dependence toward a more democratized art experience. In the organization of exhibitions, Effekt again prioritizes the needs and desires of the audience. In their manifesto, they state, the public opinion in design should be taken into account. Exhibitions of this type require a new basic economic structure. Events of this kind can never be financed through sales, as is possible with conventional exhibitions. What options are available? It should not be forgotten that this new type of exhibition is designed for a large number of visitors. This number of visits is the starting point of the economy. A rental company buys a reservoir of objects, ideas, and materials. In large cities, rooms, gardens, etc., are bought and rented in the long term. The exhibitions are exchanged among the cities. Through intensive advertising, visitors are determined. Entrance fees will be used to finance the events. From art exhibitions, come a show. Effekt's proposal for a new economic structure that would support a more democratic and social art exhibition type closely resembled the policies of Yugoslavian socialist self-management, also known as a participatory economy, the official economic policy of Yugoslavia, which sought a third way between Western capitalism and Soviet communism. This type of economy empowered workers to manage companies and separate management from state powers. In a similar way, Effekt artworks redirect agency in an exhibition setting from the gallery owners and artists to the spectators. Another way to counter capitalist tendencies in art reception, Effekt asserted that art had to be equally accessible and understandable to as many people as possible. In their manifesto, Effekt proposed integrating art exhibitions and events into more public spaces like gardens, beaches, courtyards, and streets. By bringing their art into public spaces, they could further disseminate their democratic ideals. They felt the viewer should be reached and addressed directly without intermediary interpreters such as art critics or gallery owners. In addition, the factual formal language and the examination of visual phenomenon were aimed at a general understanding of the works across cultural borders. Effekt artworks echoed the work of other New Tendencies artists, most notably those from Yugoslavia, who similarly incorporated elements of self-management in artworks as a means of activated spectatorship. For example, Yugoslavian artist Vencelav Richter's artworks and urban designs were intended to foster a radically egalitarian society in accordance with self-managing socialism. Richter's Self-Meter series from 1963, which also exhibited at the third New Tendency show, demonstrates his aims to de-hierarchize the artistic experience and grant spectators more aesthetic agency, as his sculptures also invited spectators to participate in the piece's visual effects, as both a physical framework and a symbolic device for forging a new society. The relief meters were made up of identical aluminum cuboids arranged into various configurations. The viewer was able to manipulate the sculpture by pushing and pulling on the blocks. In this manner, the individual was able to independently create a work of art while operating within an externally imposed system. As Grave, another New Tendencies art collective based in Paris, stated, the aim was, quote, within our possibilities, we want to free the viewer from their apathetic dependency, which forces him to do more than just passively endure what is imposed on him by art, but also his entire living environment, end quote. In addition, the participation of the viewer should result in his active aesthetic education, which is hoped could ultimately lead to an expansion of the creativity of all people, and that's the actual end quote. Other artists in West Germany at this time similarly pushed against late capitalist economic art production and distribution models. In 1963, Fluxus artist George Brecht designed a series of cheap and disposable boxes containing small printed cards with instructions known as offense scores or flux scores. These boxes, titled water yams, sometimes referred to as a flux box or flux kit, invited its owners to perform simple open-ended tasks with a large degree of interpretation to be chosen by the performers and audiences. In Brecht's production and marketing of water yam, the high cost of culture is problematized through the use of cheap materials, which resulted in low costs in the participating audience. Similar to Effekt kinetic spaces, the flux kits prioritize audience experience and disempowered the commodity fetishism of the art object. It's important to remember, though, that Fluxus was a large, multifaceted group of artists with some common interests, but with wide-ranging political implications. Many scholars have grappled with West German anti-capitalist, this West German anti-capitalist zeitgeist of Fluxus and other artists at this time, but Effekt uniquely incorporated influences from Yugoslavia in their proposals for a new type of art object and exhibition model. Ultimately, the Effekt artists dreamed of humanizing industrial society through art. The hopelessness of such an undertaking, the impossibility of distributing art outside of distribution channels of the market, and the discrepancy between idea and action were certainly already known to many of these artists, at least subliminally. And this ultimately led to the movement becoming exhausted and then disbanding. Effekt dissolved as an artistic collective in 1968 because of disagreements over the escalating political situation in West Germany, as Helga Sommerrock and Walter Zeringer started overt political work, and the student movements were rising in power. Sommerrock was involved with the SDS, or the primary leftist German student organization, and later became a co-founder of the rebuilding of the Communist Party in West Germany. Walter Zerwinge left the group to work in a car factory to agitate to action passive German workers. Dieter Hacker was the only member who continued as an artist and founded the 7th Producer Gallery in Berlin, shifting his practice away from the constructivist paradigm and interpreting the political position of the artist as the main subject of art. While Effekt worked collectively, however, the group represented their utopia with a powerful voice by restructuring the classic relationship between the viewer and the work of art, to attempt to liberate people from their passivity. Their rejection of conventional exhibition structures, collective ethos, and attempts to connect art to the modern world made the group an avant-garde movement with a high socio-political claim. The group's works and their name exemplify the vitality and optimism of the 1960s felt by West German artists and their common dream. Thank you.
So I'm just going to stop share. Well, thank you. And I can see that you're sitting right there very patiently, Cindy. So maybe by way of questions for, as Michael has mentioned in the chat, if people have questions online, maybe ask them in the chat. We can also reread them as well. But also I'm happy to field, maybe for Cindy's benefit, if you want to ask questions, I can reread them up here or repeat them up here, or you could come up here if you like, if you want to jump on camera. Do we have any initial questions? Does anyone want to come and jump up on the camera?
Actually, I had something. Can I jump in? Okay. I'm fascinated by the model of exhibition conferences that the group was trying to develop, and as a challenge to the economics of art formation and art sharing, but obviously they intended it as a challenge more broadly to kind of economic structures. Is the Frankfurt group, etc. Could you say a little bit more about what kind of influence that model of conference making and exhibitions had following those years? Did it have any influence?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you know, the Effekt Group was largely reacting to this moment that they were recognizing that they had these high political aims to use their art to restructure people's thinking about these oppressive systems that they felt like they were in. And then they recognized very quickly that the type of art that they were making were being co-opted by the very systems that they were trying to fight against. And so they had this notion of, okay, well, we have to operate outside of that. And really, to me, the most fascinating part of the group itself is the fact that they disbanded, because they ultimately came to realize that this aim that we have is just, as of right now, not going to have an impact, not in the way that they perceived it would. So you have someone like Helga Sommerrock, who becomes highly politicized, becomes, you know, a major figure within the SDS, and then becomes this major figure of this other, you know, rebuilding of the Communist Party within West Germany. And then she says that she completely rejects the art world. But the irony is she has said for so many years that I reject the art world, and then come to find out they're still performing, you know, political street theater, and they're still creating posters, and they're still creating these really odd replicas of these animals that they have going, you know, in Berlin, and it becomes really convoluted and complicated. But it certainly had an impact on her political life, even though she kind of has this notion that she completely rejected the art world. But then you have someone like Dieter Hacker, who's also from the Effekt Group, who continues to make art, but he essentially creates an exhibition space in West Berlin when Berlin was still divided, and essentially said, I'm no longer going to produce art. I'm only going to create a space where we can have commentary on art. So then he makes billboards, right? So, you know, it's kind of this funny it's an interesting question that you're asking, because it's like, what is the impact that they have? And the reality is that West Germany, you know, like it's still a capitalist based, you know, artistic structure that is there, and they were still operating within those confines, and yet trying to find ways to be subversive. So it's, I don't know, I think it's like an odd, it's hard to even have a vocabulary for this, because they are operating, you know, because overtly, you know, basically you have two artists who are saying, I'm not making art anymore, even though that's absolutely not true. And then you have one artist saying, I'm making art, but it's political in this way. But he's still not really producing art in the same way he was before. So it's kind of this tense, you know, way of talking about how are they going to go forward when they reach this moment where they say, well, art is not going to accomplish the ends, not in the way that we want it to at this moment. So that probably doesn't answer your question, but it's a good question to consider of you know, kind of the repercussions of what they do when they kind of recognize that, you know, what we're doing is not having the impact that they have intention or are intending it to, if that makes sense.
Do we have another question, or from people on Zoom as well? I do have a question that I guess is, I'm afraid it's actually probably really similar to Marco's, so I don't know. I'm sorry if I'm asking you to say similar things again. I guess I was thinking, I'm not as familiar with Effekt, but I'm familiar with Claire Bishop's work on participatory art, and I guess some of the, which is a continuation from this, right? I guess a conversation about art not as a commodity, but as an experience, or as thinking very much about making the participants active. And I think what she, as I'm sure you know, what she documents is this tension between, you know, is participatory art actually just a way of jazzing up art exhibitions, you know, and the art world? Is it an internal conversation that's just about other types of experience to enhance the pleasure and enjoyment within an art community? Or does it have a more prefigurative potential to actually change society more broadly? And I thought that little comment you had about the economics, the notion that if you get the economics of art right, you're actually setting up an economic model that people could then bring to other spheres, right? Once people realize that you could think differently about commodities, then maybe food or maybe housing or maybe something else could change. I guess I'm just wondering, is that, one, is participatory art relevant, and is that prefigurative aspect, was that a priority for the Effekt group?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think Claire Bishop, she has amazing work about participatory art. And I agree with you. I think that one thing, at least for me, from what I understand from Claire Bishop as well, she does a good job of sort of parsing out how participatory art, like any sort of, you know, kind of category we have, you know, abstraction is going to have different meanings depending on the context you're coming from, right? Or who's producing the abstract work of art. Participatory art is always going to have these different intentions depending on what context they're coming from. And I think that that's largely part of the reason Effekt, I think, has become, because there really is no study that exists in the world about Effekt at this moment. Nobody has ever really talked about it. And I think that largely comes because it was such this sort of odd combination of these West German, you know, student activism, but also this Yugoslavian new tendencies movement that also hasn't been talked about a lot in art history. And so it's sort of this notion of, and of course they disband and kind of now have these claims of, you know, what we did at that time was a failure, and, you know, it was too utopic and all of these kind of things. And that's, you know, a larger question you can always ask is, what is the actual impact of the things that we're looking at? Because like you were saying, you know, if the intention is to come across these works and to recognize your role within these larger systems still exist, right? So ultimately, you know, we can't credit the Effekt group with making any changes, but in that way. But at the same time, I think that, you know, obviously, you know, this is very much in the kind of turn, in the post-war turn, where participatory art becomes something very politicized, depending on the context that you're coming from. But I don't know. That probably didn't answer your question, but that was a little commentary on it. But yeah.
do we have any final comments? Anything final anyone wanted to add in from the room?
As I was just saying, thank you very much for the presentation.
Well, thank you very much. That was really good. That was a great video, and it was also so good to be able to see you live. And what time is it there for you?
It is 8 o'clock, 8 p.m.
Oh, yeah.
Not too bad, not too bad.
Thanks for joining us. Thank you so much. And our third speaker is Rosemary Joyner. Rosemary, I think, wait a second, I'm just going to make sure that the screen, because I can see that are you here? Yep, you're here. Hi, Rosemary. Do you want to just say something so we make sure the audio is working?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Perfect, we can hear you. Now, you did send through some slides, but would you like to share your screen, or would you like us to try and do that at our end?
Look, I just had some technical difficulties and I've lost my slides. However, they are so minimal that if there's any drama in sharing them, we don't have to stress. I could email them later. It's your call. Because I've
got them right here. Let's see if we have better luck this time.
Yeah, great.
Than we did before. And I'll quickly introduce you. I'm sorry, I forgot to do that last time.
Not at all.
Okay.
Oh, great.
Okay, excellent. I'll quickly just tell people, and I'm sorry, Cindy, I forgot to give you a proper introduction. Rosemary Joyner, so the title of the paper is, actually, you can see this already, a young adult novella and critical exegesis exploring the social impact of volunteering. Can storytelling seek to inspire social change? Rosemary is a PhD candidate at the Federation University School of Fine Arts in the Future Regions Research Centre. Her research focuses on practice-based creative research to measure and capture the impact of volunteering. She's particularly interested in understanding what practice-based creative research allows the traditional research methods across various disciplines. She has a Master of Arts in Writing degree and also 15 years of industry experience as a leader of community participation and volunteer engagement. Thank you so much for joining us, Rosemary.
Thank you. I'm going to launch straight in. I'm mindful of the time. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Gunai Kurnai and Bunurong as the traditional owners of the land now known as Gippsland, where I have carried out most of this research, and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. Gunai Kurnai and Bunurong always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And I'd also like to thank the symposium for having me, and especially for opening this event up to remote presenters in a hybrid model. So yes, you can see the title of my study there. We can flick to the next slide if we like. Again, my slides are so minimal and some of them might even be a surprise to me. Oh, great, and we can flick to the next one as well. So my main research question is, in what ways can a practice-based creative research approach be used to create new knowledge about the impact of volunteering, altruism, and activism? And when I asked this question, I found two other questions emerging, and they were, what does a practice-based creative research approach allow that traditional research methods do not when exploring the impact of volunteering, including activism? And what can narrative storytelling in the young adult fiction genre influence? In what ways can narrative storytelling in the young adult fiction genre influence attitudes towards volunteer participation in under 18s, in young people? So Crystal and Marg is my first novella. Writing it has been an immersive experience, drawing on my years of experience in the complex and rewarding world of community volunteering and community participation. In practice-based creative research, we might flick through to the next slide on this one. In practice-based creative research, we use an artistic practice to learn about something else. One doesn't generally make a film about filmmaking or write a novel about storytelling. So while I am a creative writer, practitioners usually need some expertise on which to focus their research. And my area of expertise is the world of volunteering. So employing practice-based creative research in the artifact exegesis model, my study examines how creative writing can be used in an academic context to explore theory and thought around social impact through creative practice. And my research contends that creative practice can create new knowledge by weaving together these stories of existing research and the stories that live within the research gaps, creating empathy in the audience and aiming to inspire social change. My creative work, Crystal and Marg, the novella, tells the story of teenager Crystal, who, in order to meet her obligations in her failing secondary school studies, excuse me, is required to undertake volunteer work at her local aged care home, at first begrudgingly. And through this volunteer work, she meets Marg. Their friendship takes time to grow, but over time they come to have a transformative effect on each other's lives, reflective of the transformative impact of volunteer work. In the novel, I have explored the social connections through the relationships of various characters, and through various viewpoints and various positions of understanding, I've sought to reflect how benevolence can lead to increased generosity and selflessness in people who volunteer. And we can flick through to the next slide. The narrative storytelling approach has allowed me to weave together multifaceted narratives of the full story of the impact of volunteering, the long-term whole-of-life impact on individuals and communities, and the ripple effects in a way that I argue can't be done using traditional research methods. Around the world, creative practice researchers are using their craft in various ways to contribute to knowledge. And my approach seeks to synthesize a creative manifestation of both the realities that exist within the research gaps, as well as what we know from existing research in the field. And while the novella is completely a work of fiction, the epigraph reads, "This never happened, but it happens every day." And we'll flick to the next slide. So the Oxford Dictionary defines volunteering as freely offering to do something, and Volunteering Australia defines volunteering as time willingly given for the common good and without financial gain. When using the term volunteerism, my study has included the intersection and overlap between what has traditionally been defined as altruistic volunteering in society and activism. For many, especially younger people, volunteering and activism go hand in hand. In the current climate, we've seen an overtaking of public spaces through activism, protest and uprising, and indeed public art itself and interaction with it has invited an opportunity for activism throughout recent history. And this includes posters used in protest and activism as covered by Eleonora earlier, where individuals choose to give of their time in deliberative volunteerism and intentional activism reveals much about people as individuals. And where groups choose to give of their time in volunteerism and activism reveals much about them as a community. So Lucas Walsh spoke of the overlap between volunteering and activism in his piece, which was called "Stop Calling Young People Apathetic, for Many Volunteering and Activism Go Hand in Hand." That was the name of the piece, where he argued for an acknowledgement that young people are already volunteering. It's just that it may appear different to the traditional definition of volunteering from generations past. And when I say generations past, I include my generation as well as my parents' generation and older. And Walsh also referred to a report that was released in 2018, the Mission Australia Youth Survey Report, which found volunteering to be one of the top 3 activities for young people, interestingly ahead of arts, culture and music activities. And he asserted that the measures, and I quote, measures used to track volunteering fail to capture the breadth and depth of volunteering that take place among young people. So it was a mismatch of definitions. So this statement referred to the varied models of volunteering, including activism, among younger people in the 21st century. So beyond a mere overlap, perhaps the takeaway is that volunteering, especially for young people, volunteering is activism and activism is volunteering. If we could move to the next slide, please. So why storytelling? So academia has produced valuable research seeking to quantify the impact of volunteering. However, traditional research methods often limit scope to economic measures, limited terms and narrow metrics, and gaps can remain when traditional research methods are employed to research the impact of volunteering, including its social impacts. Such methods, it can be argued, cannot seek to tell the full story. Humans by nature recognise impact, significance and values through storytelling. Writer Ursula Le Guin said, "There have been great societies that did not use the wheel, but there have been no societies that did not tell stories." Practice-based creative research allows me to weave together the full story of the impact of volunteering, the long-term, whole-of-life impact on individuals and communities, and the ripple effects which can galvanise communities, forge change, and transform lives. In the tradition of creative research practitioners, my study involves writing a novel which uses creative storytelling to weave together the multifaceted narratives about the longitudinal, far-reaching effects of volunteerism and activism in order to tell the full story of its impact and fill research gaps and provide a meaningful accompaniment to traditional research. Mirroring the goals of the Effekt Group, which Cynthia talked about, the creative work aspires to inspire serious political and social goals in the audience in the interest of social change. So if we can just flick to the next slide. So a little bit about asking meaningful questions. And some of you in the room might find that this mirrors a lot of the work in your own field. So Dr. Tully Barnett from Flinders University in Australia talks about the challenges involved with incongruous questions which attempt to measure the value of tricky subjects. In her field, Dr. Barnett's research often looks at attempts to measure the value of arts and culture in society, often using economic metrics. Conversely, she speaks of a report published by the World Wildlife Fund in 2015, which attempted to measure the value of the world's oceans in economic terms and found the world's oceans to be worth $24 trillion. Barnett argues that research which uses incomprehensible and meaningless questions risky. Not only do we risk producing incomprehensible and meaningless answers, we also risk posing very tricky follow-up questions. Barnett asks, if the oceans are found to be worth $24 trillion, what happens if next year the oceans are only found to be worth $22 trillion? Similarly, if research finds the volunteering sector in Victoria, Australia, to be worth $58.1 billion, as a recent report did, what happens if next year it's found to be worth only $56 billion? And Barnett's conclusion was that not only is the question about the value of the world's oceans, and an incomprehensible abstraction, but so is the answer. And that statement may be true when attempting to measure the value of the world's oceans, when attempting to measure the value of various arts and culture programs in society, and when attempting to measure the value of volunteering, the impact of volunteering. So when, as researchers, we attempt to measure social impact and cultural value, we transverse unique territory. Researchers acknowledge the limitations that exist within traditional research methodologies for researching tricky subjects, and questions are often raised about that conundrum of how we research and measure such subjects when these traditional reports are released. So for decades, practice-based creative researchers have been traversing research territory through unique research models, and I am proud to be part of their ranks. In conclusion, I aspired to apply the study to frame a conceptual understanding of how storytelling can synthesize a creative manifestation of the realities that exist within research gaps, turning away from traditional research methods, which may risk asking the wrong question and getting the wrong answers. The practice-based creative research approach allowed for the impact of volunteering, altruism and activism to be explored through storytelling. In crafting an artefact which can be a meaningful accompaniment to traditional research in my field, I look forward to sharing my novella with you on completion. Thank you. I don't know if I quite got through all my slides there. There is a slide.
Thank you so much, Rosemary. And also, I mean, of course, in particular, because Hunar has been supported by so much generous volunteering, I think this is an ideal place to have some of these conversations as well. We really appreciate all that help. Does anyone, either on chat or in person, does anyone have any questions for Rosemary? Does anyone in the room? Yeah, Liam.
I'm curious if Rosemary wants to investigate volunteering and activism and then came up with storytelling as the best means to do that, or whether she was really passionate about writing a novella and thought to be really informed by deeper research into it. So she came first to the storytelling or first to the research project.
Great question. And it was really, I know it feels like a strange answer, but it really was kind of both. I've been a writer for a long time and I've been in the volunteering sector for a long time. And so really what it was figuring out how to make the practice-based creative research model work. And at first, it wasn't necessarily going to be a novella. There are so many ways to use storytelling. You know, people sometimes, you know, use subjects. You know, you could get a group of volunteers and interview them and ask them, you know, have some kind of a creative team and interpret their own creative practice. So it was really just about finding the right model, and in the end it did end up being, you know, my own novella, for better or worse. There are so many ways, you know, there are so many ways of using the model, and it's very hard creating a research methodology. And I missed a lot of yesterday's session, so I don't know what kind of researchers I'm talking to. I don't know who the audience is today, but, you know, there are people doing gallery exhibitions and there are people doing so many different types of work in the field. But yeah, so they kind of, the answer to your question is they both really happened concurrently. It was just a matter of figuring out what that creative practice piece was going to look like.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions from the floor while the camera is faced in this direction? I actually do just have I'm going to turn it around to me. I do have an extra question, Rosemary, and because this is actually something that's been coming up a little bit in our conversations about Hunar, which is, you know, there are obviously forms of volunteering where it's actually a sector of society where there should be paid work, right? There's forms of volunteering that's actually picking up the slack where the state has failed or where institutions have failed, and that at certain points in time it has been paid work. There are obviously other forms of volunteering where it actually has to be volunteering to create the right types of relationships or create the right type of community or understanding for it to function in the way that it does, that actually paying people or bringing it within the sphere of wage labor might actually damage it. So I guess I'm wondering, can you speak to that? Is that part of what you're interested in is the specific atmospheres or relationships that can only happen in a volunteering context as opposed to other wage labour contexts.
In the biz, we often go back to the definition, which is time willingly given without financial gain. And it often comes back to that definition. You know, the work that volunteers are doing has changed so much. And in many ways, it's changed for the better, but it needs to be done because people are wanting to do that work above and beyond what they do in other spheres of their life. You know, unpaid internships is not altruistic volunteering. You know, there is a huge conversation to have in that space because a lot of the changes are for the better and a lot of the changes are for the worse, and there's a lot of work to be done there.
And that's a really, the example of unpaid internships is a really interesting one, right? Because our undergraduate students, that's often the immediate thing that they're facing if they're coming from arts, communications, and so on, is those sorts of opportunities and all those sorts of hazards. So that was really useful to bring up.
1000%. There's huge risk in that sphere.
Do we have a final? I realize we're going a little bit over time, but you know, it's great to, if there's anyone who's got a final question either here or on the chat, is there anything else that people wanted to add in? Okay, well, thank you. I realize we're also holding people from going to lunch. Thank you so much for Rosemary, but also thank you, Cindy, if you're still there, and also Eleonora for such a lovely session. It was great to hear from all of you. So maybe just a final round of applause.
And a shout out to Symposia volunteers.
Thanks, Rosemary.
Thanks, guys.